Welcome to Pug TV. I'm Jadrian, and tonight we're going to be doing something really different. I know I've said that before, but I thought tonight I want to do something really different. This idea came to me a while ago when we were talking about different things that we could watch and do, and some folks told me about, I had mentioned doing a board game, and then some folks had mentioned doing you could do you know uh, something game board related, but someone was already doing that. They were talking about this show called uh, Geek and Sundry. So I went and watched them. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's pretty cool. That's exactly what I would like to do one day. So I was like, well, I can't quite do it that way, the way that they did it, but I'll find a way that maybe I could do a board game and show it. So just kind of playing around, and then it came to be like, well, what kind of board game? What would you do? So I finally found something that is a guilty pleasure of mine. I like war games, but I don't really have anyone to play with them, so I've never bought them. And looking around on the internet, I found a lot of people play war games electronically. So one thing led to another, and I found that they have electronic game boards that you can get. So with a little bit of search, you can find this game board software. And I found two, one called Vassal and one called Zunsu. So I thought that I would share some of my findings with you fine folks and kind of demonstrate how the software works. And to do that, I'm going to show you one of the game boards called Zunsu first. It seems a little bit smaller in scope as far as like supported game boards with it, but I found it's pretty intuitive and nice. Vassal is a really good one as well, and it has lots and lots of games. So if there's some other game boards out there, I can give them a try. But the Sun Tzu and Vassal seem like they have a lot of support for war games. I did see some other board games, so a person could look. But I'm going to show you a game that I found, so I thought I would check it out. It's a war game called Conflict of Heroes, and this particular one from the set is Storms of Steel. And it actually has some solitaire rules built into it, which is perfect for me. Play it by myself, so you can watch me play with myself tonight a little bit. Yeah, I guess that did sound awful, but it's solitaire. So anyway, we'll take a look at the game, kind of explain some of it a little bit, and just kind of show you how these game boards work. Now the cool thing is, like, if you like the game board idea, you can actually do multiplayer with these game boards. So like if you really wanted to play, Storms of Steel or some other game with other people, they do have multiplayer components. So this still fits my free to play because everything I found is free and you get to play it. Now it's not necessarily massively, but it gives you an opportunity to, play some things that you might not otherwise have the money for. Now you gotta be careful because some of these game boards are actually put out by the company, and some of them are not. Some companies don't want their games put out in a game board format, so just kind of respect the wishes of the game makers. And if you go to like the Vassal website, they're a big supporter of making sure that everything they put out is sanctioned and allowed by the creators of that game. And same with the Sun Tzu. They seem to really make sure that we don't violate any publishing things. So anyway, that's what I want to do. We're going to take a look at Conflict of Heroes, the Storms of Steel on the Zunsu board. And to look at this with us, so far in the Pug Pen, I've got Eagle Claw. Hey, Eagle Claw. And we've got Raz. Yeah, that's weird. On Raz's list it doesn't show who's here, and I got Eagle Claw. So Twitch, they went through a nice update on their layout and software and things like that. So if you're here and I don't see you, I apologize, but maybe talk in the chat. So what we're going to do is take a peek at the game board. Alright, so I know you've got my face plastered all over the game board, so I'll just kind of move it over a little bit. But this is what your digital game board is going to look like. These are actually components from the actual game. I was able to find all the rules at the actual website, and I'm so impressed that I told my wife this is going to be a game that I purchased. So If nothing else, this is great marketing for the company. You get to play the game, learn the rules. That way, when you actually buy it, boom, you're all set. You're good to go. Now, this particular game, the reason why I chose it is it teaches you how to play the game in a structured tutorial teaching method. A lot of games I've looked at are very in-depth and complex binders of rules, and you've got to read, pretty much through the whole rule book and pull out the bits and pieces you want to play the game you want. So I went with this because it starts you out very basically. You get some infantry units, you learn how to do basic movements and shooting. Once you get that down, you then can move on to adding elements as you go along. So it can be very complex as you want. So we're going to focus a lot on how cool a game board can be, how you can play with it, and we'll actually play this game out. And we'll play it for a little bit, go back and forth on the turns. And this will give me a chance to see if I can even make sure I'm doing the game right. So I got over here my rule book, and in addition to the rule book, most of these games will come with basically like a scenario pack, a scenario book, to where you can, have the statistics of the mission, so you know what exactly is going on in this particular mission. So that's what we're going to do, is play out a firefight, and then as I need to do rules referencing, I got my books. So first things first is we're looking at our playboard here. This is the default setup. Now the Sun Tzu, when you load the game and then load a scenario, it has the pieces placed in the starting positions as described by the scenario. So I can right click on the board and it changed my mouse pointer contextually to the magnifying glass, and now I can zoom in and zoom out, move the map around so I can focus in on very specific parts of the board. We also have a dice roller. Now the dice roller is specific to this game. They have here several sets of dice because you can have up to 4 players on certain scenarios, and so if you wanted, you could, if you're particular about dice, you could say, well, I'll be yellow, this person's blue, this person's green, so on. So there's the dice for you as well. In addition to the map board, the game also requires a tracking sheet of action points and command action points. It has a victory point tracker, so as you meet certain conditions on the field, you can earn these victory points. And then depending on your scenario, you can either win by when time runs out, who has the most victory points, or whatever the predetermined victory conditions are. You have your time track so that you know exactly how many turns are up that have passed. Your different scenarios will require a different amount of time passed before you have to worry about tracking up, totaling up victory points for who won. Other aspects of the game here that we'll talk about: how to use your command action points per unit, and that's what these blue and green fields are for. And each player would have their own track to use. Then down here we also have a stack of counters. These counters are used in this basic game that we're playing for damage. So if I was to shoot another infantry unit, I could draw one of these chits, place it on the enemy, and that would tell me what kind of damage was inflicted upon them. So very, very simple. Now what's nice about the game, because it starts out real basic and builds upon itself, we're just playing with a few elements from the overall game. So a person who is very familiar with war games can look at this and say, wow, that's, very, very basic. You have some infantry, congratulations. But as you progress, you'll eventually have vehicles and mines, artillery. It has rules to cover a lot of things that you would want in a war game. So we'll talk about the basic aspects of that game, and then maybe talk about some of the additional things you can have. Some additional things you could have that are not used in this very first game is you can actually have some cards. These cards are basically used to augment actions that you can have. It's not a card-driven game at all. Sometimes you'll be given the opportunity to draw a card, and some of these cards just give you, little bonuses. For example, here just looking, like here's one. If you had this card, it says you can basically take one free action of any cost with any fresh or spent unit. So they give like little bonuses to you. You don't have many. Some scenarios will have more than others. Some will tell you how you can earn more when you get to use them. Some are pieces of equipment that once it's used you don't have it anymore. So you do have some additional things you can pick up, but not many. There are some actual war games that are card driven, kind of like a Magic the Gathering. Maybe, that's oversimplifying it, but this is not a card driven game. It just has some cards to help augment what is done in the game. But this first scenario that we're going to do, no cards. And for fun, this particular build of the game, they have included coins that could be used for different scenarios. There are some missions that say, if you have a penny, you'll use some pennies to do certain things. And for this Sun Tzu module, the person who put this module together just created some of these coins. Some are German and some are Russian. But again, we won't be using that. They also have the option where you can, depends on your mission, if you're doing hidden movement, you can have a hidden map for player A and then a hidden map for player B, so that your main battle map would have the things that are supposed to be seen, and then your player A and player B maps can have your hidden and tracked movement that you're not, you don't want the opponent to see. Finally then, here are some other counters. What this is if you had tanks, they actually have hit damage counters for vehicles and then damage counters that you use with infantry. This first mission, since all we're doing is infantry, those are the counters that have been punched out for us to use. And then here are the rest of the Russian units that come in the game that we aren't using, and here are the rest of the German units. So it's quite possible that if you were, ran out of scenarios to play and you wanted to make your own scenarios, you could, because this does include a lot of different equipment you could play with. Various tanks, some airplanes. So the game can get very complex beyond just a few infantry pieces. Finally, you have some miscellaneous counters that come with the game, some representing fortifications, smoke, bombs, mines. So there's quite a few things that you can add to the game. Now, I chose this game to do because I like the idea that it is simple to start with. You can make it as complex as you want, and it's easy. It makes sense. Most of the information that you need is here on the counters, especially when you do these beginning scenarios. Some of the games I was looking into, they have a lot of rules that require charts and tables, and what the creator of this game wanted to do was try to eliminate some of that bookkeeping, and so instead of having charts and tables for everything, is put a lot of that information on the counters. And I've seen a lot of games that are kind of moving to that, and I'm actually going to look at some other games because my the board games have quite a few of these other games I'm interested in. So for example, let's take a look at a counter. Now with this Sun Tzu's board game interface, your counters you can rotate as needed, and which is important for this game specifically because your units have a facing. It's important because that tracks what their field of fire will be, so when they engage enemies you need to know exactly where their front arc is, and that was indicated by the green arrow on the top of their chit. So every one of these counters, and we'll just zoom in a little bit more, has a facing. And it's important that that facing is towards an actual hex side. So what I'm going to do is just move one of these counters out here. So you could not have your hex on a half like that, and that's not valid. So it needs to be facing flat against a side. Then some other pieces of information that are useful. On your chit, these represent essentially a squad of soldiers. So even though you might see one person on here, 2 or 3, these are generally squads of men, and squads vary in size, so it's kind of an abstract representation. But they do have what is called a cost to fire. So as you take your turns playing and you and your opponent go back and forth, you get to spend these action points to do actions with your troops. So if they wanted to fire their weapons, it would cost 3 points. Then they have a damage value. Now you have soft targets, if you will, and then hard targets. Your red is used against soft targets, so this would be an excellent unit to use against other infantry. Now hard targets like tanks, they have a 0 in this blue color, which means they are not effective against armor at all. So you probably wouldn't want to run them up against a tank at distance. However, you can do like overrun assaults and what they like to call close combat, at which point then that's representing that the soldiers are swarming over the vehicle. They're trying to shove grenades into sensitive parts of the vehicle to try and take it out. So they could do some close assault potentially. However, I would not want to at distance go up against a tank with some infantry. This middle number here is their range. So this is 7 hexes that they can shoot. So if I was going to engage, I would just count out, 1, 2, 3 hexes away. That's within their basic distance. So then you have some other rules like line of sight to take into consideration. Up here then we have is their cost to move. And just looking, we all have a cost to move. This one here, I'm going to drag them down just a little bit. Okay, this is a little bit different unit. It's not infantry per se, but it is kind of counted on the infantry side. I'm going to just rotate them back. It has a little bit higher cost to move simply because it's not completely mobile. They have to, say, prep it to move, lift it, carry it, so it's not very convenient for moving. So when you move this unit, it's going to cost more points to move than, say, the German unit, which is very mobile. Over here then is its defensive statistics, and they have 2 numbers listed. Oh, Silverlock says, man, I would run up to that tank and flip it over like the Hulk could. I bet you could. These men have tried, and it didn't work out so good for them. That's why they're stuck in a board game. Alright, so then here's their defensive values. Right here, this would be their defensive value, just, if they're out in the open, basically coming in for their front. That's why another reason why these arcs are important, because attacks coming in from the front will go against their defensive value here. Anything coming in from what they call the flank, which is basically like their front arc is, wish I had like a pin I could draw, but basically if it's not coming in from their front arc where they can see, it's called a flank attack, and it's actually easier to hit people from the back side than it is from the front. So you always want to make sure the enemy is facing towards your front. So that's the little basic information about the chits that are on this game. I gotta try to remember where they were and which way they were facing. Bloop. Nice. Oh, Silverlocks is flexing. He says he could flip a tank. I believe it. I have no reason not to believe that he couldn't flip a tank. I don't think he's green like the Hulk, but he could probably flip a tank. Alright, so some other cool things that you need to consider then when you go to war, which is what we're doing, is you need to not only worry about the range, the distance at which you can shoot stuff, you got to worry about if you can see it or shoot through the terrain to even shoot at them. So on the basic rules that we're doing, you had to have a nice clear line of sight, which means you can't shoot through forest for some reason. You can't shoot through people's houses. Apparently that will absorb bullets as well. So you got to make sure that you can see. So for example, what I can do is take my mouse. This is a cool thing about the Sun Tzu board game here, their game board. If you, or game box, puts down both of your mouse buttons and you can draw a line from one hex to another, and when you're doing this particular game, you're going from the center of a hex to another hex, and if that line crosses through a hex that has an obstacle in it, then you know your line of sight is blocked. So for example, this machine gun would not be able to shoot at this German unit because the line passes through this hex, which is a building hex. And you can kind of tell what the terrain of a hex is by looking at the dot here on each of these hexes, and whatever terrain is covering that dot, that's the terrain that this particular hex is. So because this is a building hex and my line went through it, I wouldn't be able to shoot from there to him. Now if I do the same thing and measure from here, that Russian unit, because they're hidden behind the woods, they're not going to be able to shoot at anybody, so they're just kind of sitting and waiting for the enemy to approach. If I draw from this unit all the way through here, his line is cutting through the woods, so he can't shoot them. They're obscured just a tad bit. They're obscured behind the buildings, and they're obscured behind the buildings. So actually we've got quite a bit here that can't do anything. Now this machine gun, on the other hand, is blocked by the building from that hex. Nice clear line of sight over here, but again has to go through the building hex over here, so they're not going to be able to fire. But again, clear line of sight to this unit, so if they had the opportunity to fire, they had a clear line of sight here. Problem is that line of sight goes both ways, so this unit, if it needed to, they could fire back as well. So we'll cover some basic firing and movement. Now the fun thing that we're doing is using the Solitaire rules. So what the designer here has put in is basically a limited artificial intelligence that the German player or the Russian player will do. You play the Russian player, so whenever you play Solitaire, you play the Germans, and the game rules, if you will, are going to play through the Russians. And what they have in the scenario book is just some very, very simple rules that augment your basic gameplay. So what we'll do is just play through a little bit, run over some of the finer points of the game, and just show you how this could play out. Now, learning the game, reading the rules didn't take that long, but just trying to play it, it took maybe maybe a couple hours, because I'm real slow. I like to do other stuff while I'm playing. So, but if you have a couple people who have played the game before and experienced, they say that you can play an average scenario in less than an hour, which they did purposefully because they want people to play several games in a night, not just spend like the entire weekend playing a match. They want people to be able to play a match and then turn around and play another one. Because there are some games that you can literally set up and spend the entire weekend playing, which is cool if you have that kind of time. If you don't have that kind of time, you need something that's going to play quick and let you get your tactical war game on. So that's what I'm going to do, is play some tactical war game. Might not get through the whole scenario, but at least we'll have a chance to kind of see how this plays out. So let's do it. So the first thing that we do in the Solitaire rules is we have to determine who's going to go first. Now, according to the programmed instruction, the initiative is determined by rolling a die 6. So in the Sun Tzu board game system, you just take one of these die 6s, and what you have highlighted is how many it's going to roll. So for instance, if I have here all 3 highlighted and double click, it will roll all 3 dice. But for initiative, it says roll 1 die 6, and it says here that for initiative, the player wins on a 5 or a 6. The Soviets would go first on a 1, 2, 3, or 4. So since I rolled a 6, and then when the dice comes back, it kind of remembers what it was, I get to go first. Now the way the system works, it's an I go, you go, kind of back and forth system. So I'm going to pick a unit that I want to have act first, and I'm going to declare that the active unit. So what I'm going to do is take this first, better yet, I'm going to take this unit here, and I'm going to activate them first. And the reason why is because I want to move them out of the line of fire here of these machine guns. The reason why is, for this particular scenario, the time of year, this is a cornfield, and this cornfield is not grown in, and so they can't hide in the corn. This is providing them absolutely no blocking line of sight. So they're just kind of out in a field, and they can get shot at, and they probably know that. So now I have to determine, how do I move him? Well, now that I know he's active, I have a couple options here. Everything that you do spends your command points or action points. Every turn, your side gets a certain amount of action, these command action points, based on what the scenario says. So it says here that the Germans get 5 command action points, and it says the Soviet player will get 4 command action points. So I've got those on the tracker marked as such. 5 for Germans, 4 for the Soviets. Now, these command points can be spent by any unit at any time essentially. You can use it to augment dice rolls, you can use it to offset the cost of an action that another unit will take. So you want to kind of save them, protect them, but use them if you need them. So that means the action points down here is what an individual unit has to play with. Now, in the Solitaire rules, it recommends that you use a method of rolling 2 dice 6 to determine how many action points you get. So you take your 2 dice, roll them, and add that result together. In the expansion, I think it's Price of Honor, they have an alternate optional rule that says roll 3 dice 6, and you take the highest result and the lowest result. And I read that there was a good mathematical reason for that, and I forget what it is, but I liked it because I like to roll lots of dice. So what I'm going to do is roll my 3 dice, take my highest result and my lowest result, so that's a 1 and a 6, add it together, and that's 7. Now the funny thing about that is under the standard rules, when we get to the Soviet player, if you don't do the dice roll method, everybody gets 7 action points whenever you activate a unit. So this gives you a little chance to throw some randomness in there. Think of these action points as your supply. You know, some units have plenty of ammo, they've got morale, they're happy, they're moving, their units are in contact with other units, and they're, you know, on top of what's happening around them. They're better able to react and move. Sometimes they might come under fire, and then they have fewer action points when you roll, and that just represents the changing tide of the battlefield. And since I rolled a 7, just turns out to be exactly what they normally would have got anyway. So the die roll didn't hurt me, didn't help me. So now that I know my unit has 7 of these action points, I have to decide then what it is I want to do. Every active unit gets to take 1 action, and it will cost a certain amount of those action points, and then my opponent will go. So the first thing I want to do is get up out of here, out of the line of sight. So I'm going to attempt moving up behind this building to get some cover. So to pivot, to turn, I'm going to go ahead and spend 1 action point that I have. So if my board here was zoomed out so I could see everything, I could kind of pivot, move my action point, and I think technically you're supposed to move and then pivot. Let me just double check that. That's one thing about not having all the rules memorized. Sometimes you forget. Do you get to turn and then move, or do you have to move and then turn? Because you can pivot where you don't do anything, you just turn. But what I want to do is make sure that if I move, can I turn first and then move? I think I had to move and then turn. Dang, that's going to be rough. And I'll tell you why, because if you move backwards, you can move backwards, but then it costs more of your action points to move. So let's just double check on that. Okay, there's that. If you're on a move, it doesn't cost as much. Facing. Yep. Alright, so what we're going to do is I'm going to, just because I didn't see anything that really said otherwise, I might be cheating a little bit. So if this is wrong, someone can correct me at some point in the future. What I'm going to do is my move is do my turn. Yeah, I think they want you to move first because it costs a point to pivot, but if you move and then pivot, it doesn't cost anything. That's part of your turn. But if I have to turn, that's considered a pivot. So we'll try and be honest. So instead what I'm going to do is move up behind these buildings and get cover. There. Now I'm not violating anything. So to move, let's reset my maximum points. Boop. What you got to do is look at your terrain of the hex you're moving into, and that's going to determine or modify how far you can move or how many points it costs. So if I look at my chart, it's going to tell me that the corn, which is in, like for example up here, that would be wheat and these are corn. It says to go through corn it costs 1 additional action point, at least on this particular scenario. So I already know that that red cost me 1 action point, so just to move is 1 action point. To move into corn is an additional, so to move up 1 hex is 2 of my action points for that unit. The corn's not grown to full height, so it doesn't cost any protection. My wife's asking, so it doesn't affect line of sight. However, there's enough corn there that it does affect movement, because it could either be that the soil is, wet, whatever. It does present a little extra hindrance to move. Now what's neat is your scenario too, because it will determine the time of year, take that into account. So I might play this exact same map later and the corn will be grown, and then it might be even more costly to move through it. And because the corn is grown, then it has line of sight effects. So they do affect your terrain as necessary. So now when you move, you have to spend your points. Then your opponent gets to decide if they want to take some kind of opportunity action. So whenever you do something, then your opponent gets to respond and they get to do something, which is very cool. That's what keeps this game going back and forth. Some games I've seen and have played, your opponent gets to move like a whole bunch of units, like everything he owns, and you just kind of sit there and watch. This is you do something, your opponent does something. Now more advanced rules will allow for you to activate more units to move at a time. So for just the basic scenarios, it's 1 unit, 1 action, go back and forth. So we've moved, I've spent some points. So I wasn't able to get this guy completely out of cover or into cover, but he's on his way there. So the Russians look here and they say, you know what, look, that guy is running out. Let's take a shot at him before he gets away. So now we're going to take a look at how the Solitaire rules handle shooting something when they are on the Russian side. Now the cool thing about the Russians here is they've got some rules that they follow, and it's based on the die roll. How will they spend some of their command action points? Since these command action points are limited to your turn, you can use them to augment dice rolls, and you can spend up to 2 points to augment a dice roll. So this actually has a little chart that you look at, and it says, is the Russian player going to spend any of those points? So I'm looking here, and it says, when firing, the Soviets will only fire at enemy units that are in their normal range, and that they can be hit on a roll of a 10 or less. They will fire at the unit that is the easiest to hit. Well, this is the easiest unit to hit. And to determine if you are going to hit, since they have a basic firepower of 3 and we have a defense of 12, that means we would essentially have to roll 9 or higher to hit. So we're within their rule of requiring a 10 or less to hit. Then it says to determine if the Soviets will use any of these command action points down here to add a bonus to their to hit roll. I have to roll a die 6. So let's roll that and we'll check the result. And it says on a 5 or a 6, the Soviet does not modify the attack die roll. So he's just going to roll his 2 die 6 to see if he hits. And that's basically how an attack works. You look at your die or your little chit, I3, I roll 2 die 6. So that's a result of 8 plus his 3 is 11. I compare that with the defense of 12. Now this front arc is important because your front arc extends out from these 3 hexes out, if you will. I'm still in the front arc of my German unit. So it's a 12. So essentially, they missed. They took a shot and missed. But here's something I didn't do. So we'll do this now. Since it's the Russian player turn, he gets 7 APs. So when you do the solitaire game, you don't have to roll for you. You just go ahead and give every Soviet unit 7 of these action points. And right here is the cost that it has for them to fire. And it says that it costs them 4 action points to fire. So 1, 2, 3, 4. That's going to be important because if he wants to fire again, look at there, he doesn't have 4 points to spend. So we'll tell you what he can do when he comes up again. Alright, so now that the Soviet player has acted, it's back to the German side. I'm going to continue moving up because I want to get into cover. So I go ahead and move again. Now this time I'm moving into a clear hex, so there are no additional penalties, if you will, for moving. So that just costs 1 action point. Now I go back to the Soviet player side and I look with my machine gun, and the Germans have successfully made it to cover behind the building. Because this entire hex is covered by buildings, just keep this in mind. When you see one building, that doesn't mean this one building covers the hex. That just means there's buildings in the hex. So that's just what they did, is they moved up and now they're hiding in buildings or behind them. They haven't moved in, but they're hiding behind them. So he can't shoot. So now me, the Soviet player, I got some choices I got to make. And I try to play fair to where I would do what's most advantageous for the Russian player. As it stands right now, I can't shoot anybody. Can't hit him anymore, and can't hit down there because there's trees and oh, the buildings was in the way. That's right. I barely cut through the building hex, so I can't reach him. He's obscured. So what you can do is you can do what's called like an opportunity fire. So now that I've moved, I could actually have any other unit take an action, and they can spend their cap points to take the action. So for example, because these Germans have moved into view of this unit, they could respond by saying, oh man, that's not good. Some Germans just moved up on us. We need to defend ourselves. So a couple ways that we could do that. First, I could say that they're going to take an opportunity action, spend 4 points of their cap to shoot because it's not their turn. This was the active unit, not this one. Spend 4 of their cap points, fire, and then what I would do is I would flip them over to their used side, if you will, their unactive side. And this band says that they've already had their turn. Now the problem with doing that is I'm sacrificing some of my action points because instead of having 7 to play with, I had just used 4 of these command action points. And so really he's using these universal points, and he's not using the full potential of the start of his turn. Okay, so he might not want to do that. Now this guy here, since he can't shoot nobody else and he used 4 points, he only had 3 left, well, he couldn't take a second shot anyway without using a cap point. So what I could do is just voluntarily end his turn and say, you know what, he's done. What we're going to do is say that he is finished shooting and just set him aside. This unit we are now going to mark as our active unit, which means as the active unit he now gets a full 7 action points, and he can decide how to spend those points against the German player here. Now the reason why we can shoot at the German piece is because my line of sight goes from his hex down to this hex in a pure straight line. Oh, you know, I totally missed this. I'm sorry, Silverlock. I get so engrossed in my game, I totally missed your question. He asked, have you ever played Jagged Alliance Deadly Games? I haven't. I think I've heard of those, the Jagged Alliance games. I just haven't played that one at all. I don't have a timestamp, so you probably asked that like a long time ago, and I just totally didn't look at it. I apologize. I haven't played those yet. Alright, so because I go along this straight line from connecting this hex to this hex, I have buildings over here, but because this hex has a clear open space, it is assumed that we are shooting on the clear side of the hex. So he can fire because there's no obstruction here. So basically this German unit ran from being fired at by this machine gun into a whole bunch of Russian soldiers waiting to shoot at him. So not very cool. But that's what's going to happen. They're going to fire as part of their turn. So they got to do the same thing. They look here, they go 4 action points to fire. 1, 2, 3, 4. I roll a die 6 to see if they're going to spend any of their command action points to spend extra. And my chart says a roll of 2. On a 2, the Soviet modifies the attack die by 1 cap, which means he gets to add +1 to his dice roll. So he's going to spend his 1 cap. I roll 2 die 6. Add that together. 9 plus 1 is 10, plus 3 for his basic attack value. So that gives him a total of 13. I compare that against the frontal arc defense of this German squad, and they have a 12. Uh-oh. Now, yep, because this squad is in an open hex, there's some optional rules about moving in the open, but we're not using those for the basic game. And because he's in the open, there's no modifiers towards his defense for being in terrain, such as in woods or a building or anything like that. So he was hit. So what we're going to do is take a look at the different chits we have. So with the Sun Tzu board here, you can actually have your chits off to the side or cards or anything else, and then I can shuffle them just like that, and then pick one at random. So I'm going to right click twice and flip the chit over and place that on that German unit. So he got hit and he got pinned. That's the chit that I drew. Now if you're playing a multiplayer game with somebody, you can actually you would keep that result hidden from your opponent. So your opponent may know he hit you, but he doesn't know to the extent that he hit you. But you can look at your chit and you would know I'm pinned. So what does that mean exactly? So let's zoom in, part of the tutorial here. Alright, so in the Conflict of Heroes, I'm just going to pull the chit off to the side. Let's see what happens when you grab one of these here chits. Now what this does, first of all, it tells you some important information about the damage that's happened here. First, it has a R for rally. In order to get rid of this damage, you got to roll 2 dice and get a 7 or higher to get rid of this effect. That's the rally roll. Your leadership has inspired you to keep fighting. Your medics have applied bandages to your soldiers, and you're good to go. Now, this little circle here with the line corresponds with this corner. If I had a circle over here, it would correspond to that number. So when he's pinned, that means he can't move. Oh my goodness, these guys are ducking for cover because they don't want to get shot. However, that's pinned them to an open field. That's bad. So that's what the pinned means. You aren't moving anywhere. And if I want to get rid of that result, I got to roll a 7 or higher on my rally check. Now, when you do the Sun Tzu board, if I put that chit on a chit, when I have a mouse over a chit, it glows, and when I kind of line it up with another one so that the bottom chit glows, they're now stacked. So now when I move a unit, they all kind of move together, and then they kind of stack, and when I hover over it, they split so you can see what's there. So now he's damaged. Great. What you can then do is click on a stack, and if you need to, you can rearrange the order that those chits appear. So like for example, if I didn't want anybody to really see, I could just, oh, there's a damaged chit, flip it over, see what it is, and flip it back. Unfortunately, it flips the other chit too, so you gotta, be careful of that. Well, anyway, my team has suffered damage, so that's not cool. Let me tell you why that's not cool. When you get shot twice, that unit is destroyed. So in order for me to keep this unit alive, because he can't move, I have to rally him and then figure out how to get him to move. Otherwise, he's going to get shot again. Not a good way to start. Okay, so that was the Soviet player's turn. So now it comes to my turn. So here's how you rally. In order to rally and try to get your folks all happy and running again, you have to spend APs 5 in order to do a rally roll. So I have to count 1, 2, 3, 4 because I was on the 4. Well, it costs 5. So what I got to do is spend one of my command action points. So now I have a grand total of 5 points that I can spend for my rally roll. So I just have to take one of my command action points, my universal points, apply it to this to augment it, and now I can do a rally roll. So to rally, I take my 2 dice 6. Now if I wanted, because I'm really worried about this unit, I could spend another command action point prior to rolling and give myself a +1 on my roll. So I'm going to spend 1 extra action point. So I roll 2 dice 6 +1, and I hope it's over 7. Alright, so in hindsight, I didn't need to spend that command action point, but it was better safe than sorry. So that gives me a grand total of 8, plus my 1 is 9, which beats, I gotta flip it over, my pinned result. Here, I'm just gonna yank. Let me reverse these real quick. There. Since I'm just by myself, I don't care if anybody sees. Anyway, I beat my 7. So what that means is I can actually get rid of that chit now. So I'm going to open up my damaged chits, pull this one off, flip it back, put it back in the pile. Next time I have to draw, I'll just shuffle my chits and grab another damaged chit. Alright, so that squad is safe. But he has used all of his action points. So I am going to say that he's kind of done. He's spent. He can't do anything else. If he was going to do something else, he would have to use these command action points. So like if I wanted to move into the building, I would have to spend my command action points. Pivot, so I'm facing the building, and then eventually move into the building. But he's probably going to want to do something before then because he's like right there. It's bad. Okay. So now that he's done, it's back to the Soviet side. He used his turn to rally. Now the Russians are back. Well, guess what? The Russians are going to go ahead and shoot. Now there's a rule that the Soviet player has as far as the artificial intelligence. It says that they will spend APs if it will allow them to fire again. And it's going to let them spend up to 1. So, how do I use that? Well, because this unit takes 4 normally, and I've only got 3, 1, 2, 3 would be done. He would just then take one of his cap points, which would give him the 4 that he needs. So we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4. He can now fire. Then, because he's firing, I roll 1 die 6 to see if he's going to augment the die roll, which is 6 means he won't augment the die roll. He's just going to roll up straight. 2 die 6, and now we're going to see if he hits. And that gives me a 7. 7 plus his 3 is 10. Firing into the forward arc, I have a defense of 12. It doesn't hit. Yay! So they fortunately saved themselves from annihilation. They get to live to fight another day. Alright, so now we're back to the German side. Now this unit here, they're going to go ahead and put themselves as done. They've used up all their points. And now I have to decide, wow, what am I going to do with these guys down here? If I want, I could try to bring these guys up around so we can try to come in and fight that way. That might work. So we're going to go ahead and move up. First of all, though, I need to decide how many action points they have. So I roll 3 die 6, high and low. I get my 7. Yeah, I've had some where I had as low as like 4 action points, and I've had it as high as where I had 11 action points. So far I've been pretty consistent with 7. That's not too bad. So what I got to do is move this guy up. From my movement chart, I know that it's 1 point to move, plus 1 because I'm moving through corn. So that's 2. 1, 2. Then it comes back to the Soviet player side. Now I have to decide what unit do I want to activate. I think we'll activate this unit. Now this is interesting. Based on how this is set up, he can actually shoot at either of these units. He can shoot at this one, or he can shoot at this one. Simply because this line between the two hexes is clear on that side and then clear on that side. So unfortunately, even though he's still kind of in some of the corn, it didn't provide any line of sight protection, he can get kind of lit up. But you know, you got to think, well, what might be better? 2 units are going to be firing at this guy, so he's going to fire at this unit. They want to catch them in a deadly crossfire. So that's what the Soviet player is going to do. He's going to go ahead and shoot at this unit. Now because I'm activating him, he now has 7 AP. And he's going to be the active player here for a little back and forth battle. But he's going to shoot at that group right there. More firepower. So first we roll 1 die 6 to see if he wants to spend any cap. I roll a 2. The chart says on a roll of 2, 3, or 4, the Soviet player modifies the die roll by 1 cap. So I spend my 1 cap, roll my 2 die 6. 7 plus 1 is 8, plus 3 is 11, which is up against the 12 defense. So these guys are advancing, but they're always looking for cover. They're dodging here and there. They're bounding fire, so one guy's advancing, another guy will then go up. They cover each other, so they survive that. The Soviet player fired and missed, and it cost him 4 APs. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I come back down here, and the German player, because he's the active one, he just saw this German unit shoot, or the Russian unit shoot, and he's like, oh no, that's not going to work. I'm going to light you up, buddy. So what he does is he's going to shoot. Now, if you notice, it only costs a German platoon or squad 3 action points to fire. So here we go. I'm going to take my 3 points. 1, 2, 3. Now I got to make an important decision here. Do I spend any cap to modify my die roll? Why would I want to do that? Because this Russian unit is in woods. And for this particular scenario, when I look at woods, it says that it gives a defender, wow, +2 to defend with. +2 defense modifier. So not only do they have a 12 defense, +2 for the woods, that gives them a grand total of 14. I have a 5 offense, so that means I would need to roll 9. Yeah, 9. Had to do the math. 9 or higher on 2 die 6. And that's not always easy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of my cap points. I'm going to spend 2 and negate his defense for the woods. So now I roll 2 die 6. Lovely. I roll a 3 and a 2. So I roll 5. 5 plus 5 is 10. Compare that with his 12. And shots just go spraying through the woods. That sucks. So they're safe. I got a few action points left, so we'll just hold off right there. Well, now I come back here to the Russians because they're the active unit, and they get to decide, you know, well, what do I want to do? Well, they probably don't like being shot at, so they want to shoot back. And I got to look, though, how many command action points do they have? They've got 1. And it says here to shoot, if they have a difference of 9, they'll spend up to 1 action point, this cap action point, to fire back. So 3 from his 12 normal defense is 9, so yeah, he will spend a point. And what that will do is, not to hit, but to see if he will spend it towards having enough to fire. Because see, look, his fire rating is a 4. and I only got 3 AP left. So I go 1, 2, 3, 4, my last cap point, and now he can shoot at this unit. So he's going to return fire. Now, if I had had any other active units in the area, I could have maybe done an opportunity fire and shot back, but there's nobody else, so he'll just do it himself. Now, because he's out of action points here, the command action points, he can't, there's no point to roll to see if he would spend any to add a bonus to his to hit roll, because he's got no more command action points. So he gets to roll 2 dice 6. He rolls a 7 plus his 3 combat rating of 10 against their 12 defense. So again, they're juking and jiving up through the corn, hiding behind, I imagine, finding like crater holes, and as the ground kind of has, dips and elevations and things, they're just grabbing whatever cover they can. Bullets are coming in, and they're diving out of the way. So this unit is all done for action. So I come back to my active unit. They're still going, and he has, well, what have I got here? 2 action points and 1 cap point left. Not a whole lot that's interesting to happen there. However, he only needs 3 action points to fire. So guess what he's going to do? He's going to spend 1, 2, 3, his remaining 2 action points and his 1 command action point, and he's going to fire back at the Russian unit. That's exciting. Now, here's the draw. I have no command action points to spend to get me any bonuses to my die roll. So this guy is sitting in the woods still. He's going to be harder to hit because I'm not able to bring as much firepower to bear. So in your mind, because I've only got, just trying to, here, maybe shrink it down a little bit. Yeah, I'm out of command action points. This guy's in woods, so that means I have to roll a 9 or better, because he's got 14 total defense, and I've only got 5 on my offense. So you could pretend that this particular reason why that he doesn't have any extra points. I always try to think of a story. Some people are reloading, so they're not able to bring their weapons to bear this time. So I got to roll 2 dice 6. Crossing, I'm looking. How undramatic is that? 2 1s. What? That's terrible. He missed completely. I'm actually embarrassed that I just did that. All right, so there goes the German there. Okay, so he's done. Now I gotta look back and take a look at the board here. I have 2 Russian units up here, and I got my German down here. Since the German player just went, it's now the Russian player's turn. But now we have an interesting thing. In the Solitaire rules, it says that the Soviet player does not move unless you deem it an absolute necessary thing to break the rule. But essentially, the Soviet players don't move from their starting positions unless they're about to be overrun or something would cause them to want to move. You can break the rule as you want. I'm going to stick with the basic. They're sticking in their defensive position, so they're not moving. So what can you do? Well, you got a couple things you can do when you don't want to move or do anything. Like you can't shoot at anybody. Let's say you were pinned. You can't move. Well, you can do a couple things. You can pass on your turn. Now, what that means is you just simply say, I'm going to pass. You don't spend any action points. You don't do anything. You don't have an active unit. You're just sitting there. And play goes to the next person. And then he can do something. So you can pass. That's a turn. That's legitimate. You save your points for something else. One drawback. If your opponent passes, so there's 2 passes in a row, that's the end of the turn. So you're one closer to having no victory points and losing if you both pass. Another thing you could do is like a delay. Basically, you could use 1 action point to basically not do anything. The beauty of that is if your opponent passes because you didn't pass, the game keeps going. So your turn doesn't end. So for here though, I'm not going to pass because I'm going to have my remaining German unit do something. So I'm just going to simply have my 2 Soviet units just pass. No route, no delay action or spending any cap points or anything like that to hold position. They're just going to wait. So it goes from the Soviet player back to the German player. So now I get to decide he's now the active unit. I roll my 3 dice for how many action points. Take the high and low. Check it out. Boom. High is 5, low is 2. I'm back at 7 action points. We're doing awesome. I might as well just use 7 and not even roll. Anyway, so I roll, I get 7. So I have to decide what is it that I'm going to do. Well, I'm going to move up. I'm charging here. I want to take that building. So I'm going to move up 1. And that's 2 action points because 1 just to move and 1 because he's in corn. If the Russians had some cap points, even though the AI for the game says they couldn't do it, if I had a player and I had somebody that could shoot him, I could use my cap points as a free turn and have something shoot at him, but there's nothing here that can reach him, so he's kind of safe. So the Soviet player passes. Nothing can hit him. So now it's back to the German player. Now the German player says, I want to come up on into these woods or into this building. So I move up and take a free pivot because I'm going to run into that building at some point. Now because I moved into a clear space, guess what? That's only 1 action point. Okay, goes to the Soviet player. See, it gets quick when you only get down to a few units to play with. Soviet player says, I'm not going to do anything, so we're going to stay put. So now, back here to my German player, we zoom in a little bit, and I look here, I'm going to move into a building. So now I have to look and see how many action points does it cost to go into a building. So looking at my chart, it says a wooden building costs 1 additional action point. So I move up into the building, and I'm going to have my facing this way. The reason why is because if I was playing against a player, since the majority of enemy units are over here, I can have everything in my forward arc. So anything basically from that line of hexes all the way to this line of hexes is the forward arc. So if something moves, I could shoot at it if I had line of sight. So might as well. So I gotta spend my 2 points for that. 1 for moving, 1 for the building. Soviet player says, well, from this hex to there, this hex has buildings and it's in the way. I cut through it, even though I cut through it just a scunch, buildings are in the way. Especially this unit here. Look at there. He'd have to blow the building away to have a good shot. So they're safe. They're hunkered down. But this unit here in a building has a clear line of sight. So they could fire back if I had some command action points to use, but I've already used them up earlier. So basically we would look at the situation. The Soviet player has no more actions to take. My German player, nothing he can do because to shoot requires 3. I've got 2, but I've got no command action points to augment. There's nothing left to do. So I'm going to pass. And then the Soviet player passes. Now we're at the end of a turn. So there's a couple things we can do at the end of the turn. One, I'm going to move the turn tracker up 1. I'm on turn 2. Then I reset all my action points. Since I have no current active unit, they're all on 0, but I return the caps to where they are for the scenario. I'm going to put them back at 5 for the German player and put them at 4 for the Soviet player. Then I put all of these spent units, or used units, not fresh units. I'll go ahead and flip it, and now they're back to normal, ready to go. And at that point you would then roll for initiative. Now because I'm doing Solitaire, would roll 1 die 6, and because I rolled a 5, German player gets to go first. And play progresses like that. So that's just a basic walkthrough of a turn. So obviously, if you didn't have to explain the rules out loud every time you played, a solitaire play can actually go pretty quick. Again, just a few base units, some of the basic rules, but as you added more rules, added vehicles, minefields, artillery, the cards, assets, all these different things, your game will become much more complex and last longer. Oh, hey Gridster. I didn't see you, buddy. I'm doing good. Doing good. Just wrapping up here. We were just demonstrating really cool electronic board games and then showing you one of the games that you can play on it. Just doing like a / tutorial demo of the tool set and this. So, doing great. Love it. So maybe after this you can watch it and be like, oh, that's cool. I want to do that. Because it's actually pretty easy. Maybe the short answer to that should have just been, I'm fine. But I talk. Anyway, so that would be a full turn. So what I want to do now is just show you some of the things that will happen if units die, so on and so forth. We didn't have anybody die this time. But let's say, for example, Gridster asked, did I miss the show again? Yes. Yes, you missed it by an hour and a half-ish. Okay, by an hour. About an hour and 9 minutes. So yeah, you missed a little bit. What I'm going to do is flip these markers here and show you what happens if you eliminate somebody. So we've already looked at the basic firing rules where you have your basic offense of 3, you roll your dice. He says I'm always missing the show, dang it. Just come a little bit earlier and then you'll be fine. And then who knows what you'll find. It's like a surprise every time you watch. Something different. Or just watch the recording in about 10 minutes or so. Well, let's just say that I did finally hit a German unit twice. So I hit him once, I randomized my chits, I grabbed this one, and he is stunned. Okay, so we looked at this earlier, but this is a more dramatic stun. As you can see, his several things are all, wow, crossed out. This circle, like if I was to line them up, you see how those circles cover his different defensive values? That's important because that means, one, he doesn't get to move or actually fire because that covers up his firing. This one here covers up his movement, so he's stuck. Oh, Gritzer says, I'm always watching Joe Hills on his stream. Wait, what's that? I'm always watching Joe Hills on his stream. How did I miss that? What's Joe Hills? And then it's going to be tough for him to get a defense because defense value is crossed out. So this is a pretty severe item to get for being stunned. And he would have to do a rally of 7 or greater. But let's just say he got attacked again and got shot. Remember, if a unit gets shot twice, it's eliminated. So I would just throw that chit back into the mix. And then here's what you do with the dead bodies. You return them to their team, but what you do is you put them on their command action point track. And then, check this out, I had to put it here. But since this marker is right here, oh, he says, Joe Hills didn't stream tonight, but I was watching someone else. Oh, I got you. So you're watching this other guy. There's other people you watch? I'm a little sad. Quite a bit sad. Come watch me instead. Alright, so because my command action marker is right here in its place, I can't put it there. I actually have to move my command tracker down one and then put the body. So what does that mean? Why would you do that? Because what that means is, as I take losses, I have fewer influence over the battlefield, which means I get fewer of these universal points to spend on the battle. So as the body count rises, let's say they wipe out another unit, and my next turn comes around, I no longer get 5 action points to spend universally. I only get 3. So as the battle progresses and you take more casualties, it becomes more difficult for you to exert your influence over the battlefield. That makes sense. And then if you put one of them casualties, so if I took a 3rd casualty, I would have to move this down 1 more. So as I'm taking casualties, I'm losing command and control on that current battle and for future battles. It's terrible. He says, I watched Detroit. I don't even know these people. I'm going to have to start looking up who other people are. Hopefully I'm more entertaining than they are, so you'll start coming over here. So anywho, there you go. Exert less control over the battlefield, fewer points for future battles, so that's why you want to make sure you don't lose your units. And then if you do, just know that you will have less influence as the battle progresses. Attrition wears you down. Finally, if we went through all 5 turns, I would then have to stop at the end of that and add up victory points. Every time you kill a unit, your opponent gets, or every time you kill a unit, you get a victory point. So every time the Russians would have killed off a German unit, he would have gained a victory point. Also, because they control victory points, or these objective markers, at the end of the battle, they get to keep and earn victory points based on how many of these markers they control. And the scenario will tell you how much they're worth. And I believe, if I remember right, looking at the setup here, I think it said for this particular fight the control points were, I thought it said they were 2. Oh, here it goes. Nope. What it is the Russian player. Oh, hold on. Oh, never mind. Okay. No, we're good. It says here, if the German player controls both control markers at the end of the game, they get 2 victory points. Well, they didn't get any there. So look at the Soviet side. It says 1 victory point if the Soviet controls both control markers at end of game. Alright, so let's say I killed off 2 German units and I retained my 2 control points. I get 1 victory point for keeping both command points, and then it says here, 2 victory points immediately score for each German unit eliminated. Well, if he eliminated 2 units, that'd be 4 more victory points, giving him a total of 5. And it says here, I get 1 victory point for each Soviet unit eliminated. Let's say I just killed off 1. Basically, at the end of 5 turns, if this had been how the map kind of looked at the end of it, let's say we had killed off this unit here, the Soviet player definitely won in terms of victory points. And that's how you could wrap up a match. Really easy. Gridster says, you are more entertaining than Detroit, but not Joe. Oh, well, I'll take that. Since I don't know Joe, he's probably pretty cool. So, I'm not entertaining, I'm informational. Keep that in mind. Anywho, so let's zoom out. That is your basic rundown of Conflict of Heroes on a digital game board that you can play with an opponent over the internet. Download the components and everything for free off the interwebs, and then you got yourself a full-blown war game with whoever wants to play against you. Fabulous! Plus, if you go with the Conflict of Heroes, the basic game is pretty simple. I mean, we spent our almost hour and a half just talking about it, but if you took a couple of people who knew the rules, you could play through a game really, really quickly. And then, because it has the programmed instruction, as you mastered this set of basic rules, you can then move on and start slowly adding more additional rules and adding to the complexity of your game to where both of the people involved have just that right amount of rules that you want for your particular style of gaming. So there it is. He says, sorry, Joe is the best. No one can beat his chat and his stream. Yeah, probably. It depends. I don't know what Joe does, so I can't argue with that. Plus, you know, I don't have too many people like Joe. Joe probably has like a whole bunch of people, doesn't he? Yeah, well, whatever. I go for quality, not quantity. Take that. All right, there you go. That's Conflict of Heroes, Storms of Steels on the digital board. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap that up for tonight. So tomorrow night is still Star Trek. Once Guild Wars 2 comes out, we'll be realigning some of the broadcast nights that we do. Tuesday, so for now, still. Oh, yeah. Wife saying hi. Yeah, so Tuesdays is Star Trek Online. Wednesdays is still open. I don't have anything specific because I'm saving that for the realignment. Once Guild Wars 2 come out, then Guild Wars will go to Tuesdays, Star Trek will go to Wednesdays. So for now, though, Wednesdays is open. Thursday is still EverQuest 2 night, and then Friday is the Friday Fellowship in Lord of the Rings Online. So, you can come play with us during those nights. Tonight, it was quiet. But tomorrow we'll have Star Trek, and we have a lot of folks that come and play Star Trek Online with us. So come check that out. Come play with us. See, he goes, look at that. He's trying to make me feel bad. He says, right now, Joe only has 7, 8 people on at a time. Yeah, well, wait until we do like Star Trek Night or Friday Fellowship, and we have way more than that. Oh, for Wednesday, can you recommend a game? Yeah. What do you have in mind, Gridster? What do you want for Wednesday? Just waiting for him to put in his recommend. Alright, so while he types that in, so basically, if it's your first time with Pug TV, this is pretty much what we do. Gaming. All kinds of stuff. And this is new for me, adding the game boards and war games. Since I love war games, I want to get more into that. I'll probably do some more fun ones here and there. I've got also fighting formations that I'm learning. And I want to play some Combat Commander Europe. I'm curious about that one, but I'm really liking this Conflict of Heroes and Fighting Formations right now. So I'll show you probably Fighting Formations next week, just to show you kind of how the two games compare, Conflict of Heroes and Fighting Formations. So that'll be next week. So tomorrow is Star Trek Online. Wednesday, he says he'll tell me tomorrow. He has a few games to pick from. Alright, you might just send me a message or something in the Twitch so I can look. That way I have time to prepare to download it if I have to. Because if you wait too long to tell me, I won't be able to play it because I won't have it downloaded. So let me know. Thursday is EverQuest 2. Friday is the Friday Fellowship. And then Saturday and Sunday, if I decide to stream, it's just whatever I feel like doing. And then Mondays is kind of an open night as well. So that's probably when I'll do like some more board games or something. But that's kind of the schedule. And we start broadcasting at 10:30 Central. 10:30 Central. So if you ever want to come live, especially if you want to join in the game and play with us, 10:30 Central, and you can actually come and play with us and hang out. But that's all I've got for tonight. So again, thank you for those who hung out. Silverlock, missed you. Eagle Claw, Gridster, thank you both for stopping by. And anybody else who's out there that doesn't show up in my chat, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. I just got to hit the big end broadcast button.